This is a story about quiet endurance, the kind that keeps moving even when no one is watching. It's about faith that doesn't hurry life, and a man who stayed on the road anyway. The engine didn't sound right. John Miller heard it the moment he turned the key, a low hesitation before the familiar rumble caught. He kept his hand on the ignition half a second longer than usual, listening, as if the truck might confess something if he waited. It didn't. The dashboard clock glowed 4:38 a.m. Christmas Day. John exhaled slowly and pulled out of the lot, tires rolling onto the dark Houston road that still smelled faintly of last night's rain. The city hadn't woken up yet. That was normal. What wasn't normal was the weight sitting behind his ribs, quiet but insistent, like a question he didn't want to ask. How many more mornings like this do I have in me? He tightened his grip on the wheel and kept driving. For 36 years, John had done this. Early mornings, long stretches of road, coffee gone cold in the cup holder. He knew every sound his truck made, every vibration that meant fine and every one that meant not yet, but soon. Patience was a skill you learned out here. So was faith. Not the loud kind. The kind that stayed with you when the radio lost signal and the miles blurred together and there was no one to tell you that what you were doing mattered. John drove anyway. He passed neighborhoods still wrapped in Christmas lights, glowing softly behind curtains. Somewhere inside those houses were families waking up slowly, stretching toward warmth and noise. Mary would already be up. She always was. Coffee ready, dog fed, quiet music playing low so she wouldn't wake Daisy too early. John felt a familiar tug of guilt. "I'll be back tonight," he'd promised. He always came back. That was the one thing he never broke. The highway opened in front of him, empty and wide. John settled into the lane, hands steady, posture relaxed in a way that only came from repetition. He wasn't rushing. He never did. Speed didn't make the road shorter. It just made it louder. As the sky lightened at the edges, John caught his reflection in the side mirror. 58. Lines deeper than they used to be. Eyes calmer, but tired in a way sleep didn't fix. He thought of Tom, already working in an office downtown. Of Daisy, talking about college like the world was waiting for her. Of the years Mary had quietly carried the weight of his absence without complaint. Was this enough? Had it ever been? The question lingered, unanswered, as the truck moved steadily forward. John pressed the accelerator just a little, not to go faster, but to remind himself he was still here. Still capable, still faithful to the road he'd chosen, even on a morning meant for rest. Ahead, the sun began to rise. And though John didn't know it yet, this Christmas would ask him to look at his long, quiet journey in a way he never had before, not as time spent, but as something that had been building toward an answer. Slowly, honestly, all along. The radio crackled and went quiet somewhere past Baytown. John didn't reach to fix it. Silence had become familiar over the years. It asked nothing of him. No opinions. No reactions. Just space to think, which was sometimes harder than the noise. He drove with the window cracked, cold air brushing his face, the smell of diesel and wet asphalt mixing into something he associated with mornings like this. Early, unfinished, honest. The delivery wasn't urgent. It never was on holidays. That suited him. John had learned that rushing only made him feel like he was chasing something he could never quite catch. He thought about the last time he'd considered quitting. It had been years ago, after a long winter run when his back refused to cooperate and his hands shook from exhaustion. He'd come home and sat on the edge of the bed, boots still on, staring at the floor while Mary folded laundry behind him. "You don't have to prove anything," she'd said. He hadn't answered then either. Not because he disagreed, but because walking away felt heavier than staying. At a rest stop outside Beaumont, John pulled in for coffee. The place was nearly empty, lights too bright for the hour, the smell of burnt grounds clinging to everything. A younger driver nodded at him as they passed in the narrow aisle. Respectful, curious, like he was trying to place something. "How long you been running?" the man asked. John paused, cup in hand. "Long enough," he said. The man smiled. "I hope I can say that one day." John didn't smile back right away. because he remembered saying something similar once, thinking the years would move faster than they did. Back on the road, the sun climbed higher, revealing more of the day. John checked his mirrors, adjusted his seat, settled again into the rhythm of miles. His body knew what to do even when his mind wandered. He thought about the promotions he never chased, the routes he passed on because they meant missing too many birthdays, the quiet pride he felt when the truck came back clean, on time, every time. No one applauded consistency. They expected it. Still, he kept showing up. His phone buzzed just once in the cup holder. A text from Mary. "Drive safe. We'll wait." John glanced at it and felt the tightness in his chest loosen slightly. Waiting had never bothered him. He'd built a life on it. What unsettled him was the idea that maybe waiting had been shaping him in ways he hadn't noticed. That maybe the road hadn't just taken time from him, but given something back. He pushed the thought aside as the highway stretched forward. There were miles to cover yet. And though John didn't know it, this quiet Christmas drive was already setting something in motion. Something that would ask him to see his long, faithful journey not as something unfinished, but as something finally ready to be acknowledged. Not loudly, not all at once, but honestly. By mid-morning, the road had filled in. Not crowded, just awake. John felt it in the way traffic breathed now, in the subtle adjustments he made without thinking. His hands stayed loose on the wheel. His eyes scanned ahead, steady and patient. This was the part of the day where experience mattered more than speed. A younger version of himself would have been restless by now, counting miles, counting hours. This John let the road unfold. Still, the thought from earlier returned, persistent as the hum of the engine. What if this is all there ever is? It wasn't a new question, just one that felt heavier today. He pulled off near a distribution center on the edge of town, waiting for clearance to unload. Engines idled around him. Drivers stepped out, stretching, checking phones. John stayed seated. From his cab, he could see a billboard across the road. Some bright promise about starting over, changing everything, becoming more. He looked away. Starting over had never been an option for him. Not with a mortgage, not with kids depending on steady answers, not with a wife who trusted the life they'd built together. Staying had been the braver choice, even when no one called it that. While he waited, John thought about faith, not the kind spoken about in grand terms, the quieter version that lived in habits, in promises kept when no one noticed, in choosing responsibility again and again without being certain it would lead anywhere special. He'd watched other drivers leave the road, some happier, some broken, some convinced they'd escaped something. John never judged them, but he wondered, sometimes, if they'd missed what staying was slowly teaching him. The call finally came through. "Dock 3, you're clear." John eased the truck forward, movements measured, exact. He backed in cleanly, as he always did. The yard supervisor glanced at the paperwork, then at John. "You're always on time," the man said, almost surprised. John nodded. "That's the job." The supervisor hesitated. Not many left who do it like that. The words lingered longer than they should have. John felt something shift, small, almost imperceptible. Like a door he'd walked past for years had cracked open just enough to let light through. When he pulled away later, empty trailer rattling softly behind him, John realized his hands weren't as tired as they usually were. The road stretched on, familiar and unchanged. But inside him, something had begun to reframe itself. Maybe the years hadn't been invisible after all. Maybe someone had been watching. Not the loud winds, not the shortcuts, but the steady presence, the reliability, the faith expressed through repetition. John didn't know what that meant yet, but for the first time in a long while, the road ahead felt less like a question and more like an answer that was still forming. Slowly, quietly, the call came just after noon. John almost didn't answer. His phone buzzed in the cup holder as he merged back onto the highway, and for a moment he let it ring. Calls during a run were usually problems, delays, changes, things that made the day longer. But something, instinct, maybe, made him tap the screen. "John Miller," a woman asked. "Yes. This is Karen Alvarez, Regional Logistics Coordinator." I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. John glanced at the road ahead. Clear. Steady. I can talk. She didn't waste words. We've been reviewing long-term driver records, holiday coverage, safety history, reliability. John listened, heart beginning to beat just a little faster. You've been with us a long time, she continued. And you've never missed a delivery window, never failed a safety check, never refused a difficult route. John tightened his grip on the wheel. Facts sounded different when spoken out loud. We're short a trainer, Karen said. Someone who can work with new drivers. Not to rush them, not to impress them, but to teach them how to last. The words settled heavily between them. Last. John swallowed. I'm still running full routes. We know, she said. That's why we called. They met later that afternoon, just off the yard. Nothing formal. No office. Just 2 folding chairs and the quiet hum of trucks coming and going. Karen spoke plainly. Part-time at first. Fewer long hauls. More time home. A chance to pass on what couldn't be written into manuals. We're not looking for flash, she said. We're looking for someone who understands the road. John thought of the mornings. The silence. The promises kept without witnesses. I don't have anything special, he said carefully. Karen smiled. That's exactly what you have. John drove home slower than usual. Not because he was tired, but because he was thinking. About Mary. About Daisy and Tom. About the weight he'd carried quietly for decades, believing it was simply his to bear. Maybe it had been more than that. Maybe it had been preparation. Mary listened when he told her, eyes soft, hands wrapped around her mug. I always knew they'd notice, she said. John shook his head. I didn't. She reached across the table and took his hand. That's why it matters. That night, as Christmas lights flickered on across the street, John sat with Rex at his feet and felt something unfamiliar settle into place. Not pride, relief. The road hadn't ended. It had opened into something gentler, something earned. And for the first time, John allowed himself to believe that staying hadn't been stubbornness. It had been faith. And faith, it turned out, had been keeping score all along. John's first morning as a trainer didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like a continuation. The yard was already alive when he arrived. Engines idling, drivers moving with purpose, the familiar choreography of a place that never really slept. John parked where he always had, stepped out of the truck, and paused. For years, he'd walked this ground as someone passing through. Today, he stood as someone staying, for a different reason. The young driver assigned to him waited nearby, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, eyes alert and uncertain. I'm supposed to ride with you, the kid said. They said you'd show me how not to burn out. John almost laughed. Instead, he nodded. First thing, he said calmly, is you don't fight the road. You listen to it. They climbed into the cab together. John adjusted the mirrors out of habit, then caught himself and handed the control over. Your turn, he said. The kid hesitated, then nodded. John watched quietly as the truck rolled forward, not judging, not correcting right away, just watching, the way no one had ever watched him when he was learning. Later, standing off to the side as the truck eased back into the yard, John felt something settle deep in his chest. This was what the years had been for. Not just the miles, not just the patience, but the ability to stay calm when someone else needed steadiness. That evening, John came home before dark. Mary noticed immediately. You're early, she said, smiling. So are we, John replied, echoing words he hadn't realized he'd been waiting to say. They ate together. Rex curled at John's feet, content. Tom called to ask questions. Daisy laughed about something small and ordinary. Life, unchanged, and yet completely different. Later, as John stepped outside, Christmas lights glowing softly across the street, he thought back to the early morning road. The engine hesitation. The question he'd asked himself without wanting an answer. How many more mornings like this do I have in me? Now he knew. Enough. Enough to matter. Enough to pass something on. Enough to rest without regret. John turned off the porch light and went back inside, the night calm and complete. He hadn't been fast. He hadn't been loud. But he had been faithful. And in the end, that had been enough. for life to finally answer back.